Welcome back to Hints and Guesses, my podcast. I'm Kent Dobson. I am really glad to be behind the mic right now, making another podcast. It's been a little while. My computer died. I've been super busy making teachings at C3 and also for Eastlake out in Seattle. So you can check that stuff out. If you've never listened to my podcast or teachings at C3, c3westmichigan.org, worth checking out, or you can find them on YouTube. Occasionally, if I remember, I'll put them on Facebook. Same with Eastlake. They have tremendously interesting guests, and occasionally I get to teach out there. Of course, right now it's all virtual, but check out my most recent talks for those two places if you want more. Special thanks to my Patreon supporters for making this thing happen and really directly helping me get a new computer. I had an old-ish computer from 2015, and it served me well, but it finally died. And so I'm getting used to the latest updates in GarageBand, so it'll take me a little while to figure it out. But anyway, really special thanks to my Patreon supporters. I think about Patreon as a kind of virtual tip jar. Every little bit counts, from $1 on up. Back when I was in a band, back in the old days, we used to play little gigs and set out a tip jar. If there was a 5-spotter in there, we'd just be so happy. Dang, we can. Back then, that would pay for a significant amount of gas. Anyway, I'm really grateful, and I'm grateful to the little Patreon community, really, because the little interactions that you send me, little notes, comments, questions, ideas, are inspiring and helpful. And anyway, I can't thank you enough for making this thing happen. So enough of that. I have a very special podcast for you today. I'm doing another installment of The Forum, which is the place where I'm putting interviews. I've not done a lot of interviews, as you know, on this podcast, but I'm on a little run right now. So this will be my last little interview. I'll take a little break from that and go back to my normal podcasting, and then I'll bring some more guests on down the road probably. I'm enjoying it. I like the interaction. I like the unscripted nature of it, where we just begin to explore. So anyway, check out my conversation with Ryan Meeks, a friend of mine, Bill Plotkin, the ego depth psychologist that I've been working with over the last few years. I'm in his guide training program at Animas Valley Institute in Colorado. I just did a conversation with Paul Moore, and without Paul, this podcast probably wouldn't live in the world. He's the one that sort of kind of pushed me and encouraged me into this space. So today's podcast was recorded a year ago in Jerusalem. So I'm talking with Danny Kopp and Gary Alley, as they introduce themselves in the podcast. Both of them are pastors and close friends. We became close friends when I lived in Israel. And because I go back almost every year, sometimes multiple times a year, our friendship has continued. And it's kind of amazing. Like, I will send them a text like when I'm there, and say, hey, what are you guys doing? And just immediately we just get back together and pick up where we left off. And that's what I did with this. I didn't even tell them I was coming, really. I brought some pretty primitive podcast equipment, and I sent them a text. And I was like, hey, let's make a podcast. They're like, okay, come on over. So I think you'll enjoy it. For a long, long time, people have asked me, what do you think about Israel? What do you think about the Palestinians? What do you think about the, quote, Middle East? And the feeling is, oof. How much time do you have? And is it okay if I speak in contradictions and paradoxes? So I've been a little resistant to weigh into that conversation. It's difficult, it's challenging. And so that's what I'm doing on this podcast. We talk about what's life like in Israel, and it's very personal. Like Gary and Danny are the pastors at the church I went to. So we're really talking about what Christian life is like there, and what life has been like for them, and what's their experience with the tensions between Israel and Palestine, or the Palestinians and the Israelis. And It's really complex, but I think you'll appreciate their perspective. I certainly do. I have been profoundly and deeply influenced by Narkis, which is the church I went to there, by my friends there, by the leadership there. Has profoundly shaped my view of the world. So I'm really grateful. I'm just really grateful to these two people and the entire community there. And I think it's kind of like eavesdropping on conversations that we would have if I didn't have a microphone, if we were just sitting down for a beer in Jerusalem and just chatting. That's kind of what this is like. And anyway, I encourage you to open your hearts and minds and to what unfolds here. And one reason why I'm putting it out now is because I couldn't figure out how to get it off my hard drive that I brought with me to Israel and into GarageBand. Sounds stupid, but some Google action was required. So it's finally the audio is good enough, having messed with it a bit. So anyway, one reason why I'm putting it out now, besides that, is that a year from now, I'm going to do another Israel trip if all things go well with the global pandemic. I've got a group from Colorado, from Denver, Denver Community Church, where a friend of mine is the pastor, Michael Hidalgo. So a group from there is starting to organize, and that's our plan. And there will be some spots open to the public if this interests you. And I'm just starting to work on a very, very small trip. Hopefully it will happen for some pastors in May of next year. Might be one or two spots open for that as well. So beyond that, I plan to return to this, what I call pilgrimage. I started a company many years ago now, and I've been doing trips for almost 20 years, which is crazy. But I call my company New Pilgrimage because I view, first of all, I have deep respect for the ancient spiritual discipline of pilgrimage, a kind of spiritual odyssey and adventure into land and terrain and text and story, as a kind of spiritual adventure. And that's the way I treat mine. So there's a lot of Bible stuff. There's a lot of conversation about how Christianity came to be, and ancient stuff from the time period of the Hebrew Bible. And of course, we have conversations about what's going on right now in the world. You can't help it once you're in Israel. But it's also an opportunity and chance to explore one's faith or lack thereof, and questions. And in that sense, it's grounded in a certain kind of a spiritual approach. What if I open myself up to the mystery, to the land, to the text, to conversation, to other people, and to what unfolds? And I have found they not only continue to shape my life, but the people who come on my trips, I think are shaped in ways that they're really grateful for. And it's both challenging and encouraging at the same time. So that's my pitch for Israel trips. I hope you'll consider saving up some money and joining us someday. I'd love to see you along. So that's kind of enough of an intro, and I'll hand it over to myself, and I'll see you back here on the podcast in the coming weeks and months. Peace. All right, it's a bit difficult to know where to begin, other than I'm in Jerusalem with some friends, Gary Alley and Danny Kopp, and I don't know, in the family compound here. I don't know what you would call this place. And when I lived here for 3 years, both of these people and also the community that we were a part of was I don't know what I would say, was part of the profound experience we had here. It wasn't just, for me, it wasn't just coming here and being a student and going to the library, but community life and life in Jerusalem. And so anyway, maybe we should just begin by, I'd like both of you to introduce yourselves. Who are you? How did you end up here in Israel? Are you from here? That kind of thing.
So my name is Danny Kopp. I was born here, lived here pretty much all my life, except for a few years in the States, about 10 years ago. My dad's from the States. My mom is originally from Slovakia. They came here, my dad in 1966, my mom a year after that, and have been here ever since. My dad pastored at the church that Gary and I co-pastor now. And it's called the Narkee Street Congregation here in Jerusalem. And we've been doing that for about 2 and some odd years, 3 years now. Yeah.
Wait, before you go, why did your dad come here? What was the pull, and was he allowed to?
Yeah, he was. Well, his father was a minister. My dad's like 7th generation minister, and they were traveling around the world. My grandfather was kind of traveling minister, and they'd been traveling for 6 months around the world. And Israel was always kind of on their sights as evangelicals. They kind of always believed that Israel would become a state, sort of believed in the prophecies about Israel. And my dad was born on May 14th, 1948, when Israel became a state. The very day, the very hour even, Grandpa quickly, right after he was born, went and looked at the news to confirm that was the actual hour that it happened.
Did he think this was like a sign, like in a way, or?
Yeah, definitely. It was. They were pretty excited about that. So when they were traveling, when my dad was 18, they were traveling around the world. They'd been traveling for 6 months. They'd been all over the Far East and through the Middle East, through Iran, Iraq. And then when they got here, and my dad had been here as a child, even if my grandfather had lived here for 6 months. But when he got here, he was 18. He liked it. They were here, been here for a couple of weeks, and he said, I think I'd like to stick around a little more and just see what it's like. And so my grandfather went on ahead, went back to the States, and my dad is still here. So,
wow, wild.
Yeah,
and maybe we can come back to some other stuff. But yeah, Gary, who are you, man?
I am Gary, Gary Alley, and I'm originally from Florida. I came here in 95 to work with the Baptist at the Baptist House, which is where the congregation is located on 4 Narkee Street. And I was originally supposed to be here 2 years, but then I decided to go to Hebrew University, and I did an MA there in religious studies, looking at Second Temple period Judaism, early Christianity, and met my wife at the congregation and Sharon, and we got married in 2001, and we've had our 3 children here. They were born in Bethlehem, and that's kind of been the last almost 25 years. Mm-hmm. So been working at the congregation essentially for that whole time. We did a few years where we taught biblical studies at Nyack in Manhattan, but we also are quite involved with biblical languages through Sharon's father, Randall Booth, and so we've taught biblical Hebrew and Greek, and Sharon is definitely kind of an expert in that area.
I'd say, yes.
Yeah. And that's what I say, she taught you too, right, Kent? Yeah. So that was like 2003, I think.
Yeah. She was my first Hebrew teacher, really. Yeah. And it was a full indoctrination, and with no English, basically.
The Book of Jonah.
Yeah, seriously. Amazing. So I guess we should talk about Narkees, because that's been mentioned now a couple times. And like when I moved here in 2003, this was really near the beginning of the Second Intifada, and it wasn't the safest time, and it sort of got worse over those couple years. And somehow we had been told before we got here that there were a couple of congregations and that we should try to go to church, that we would feel really out of place just as students, and it's not like we could just go to the local synagogue or something. And so I think we went to Narkis even the very first Sunday we were here, a Shabbat, Saturday, we were here. And I think, I'll just give you my sort of first impression. First of all, I thought, this is odd. This is definitely community-led. This isn't it's not a service. It is a service and it's not. There were Torah readings and some commentary on the Torah. There was the Lord's Prayer in several languages. There was music, like sort of old school worship music, and then stuff I'd never heard before. And then there was a talk, and that was kind of also informal. And it seemed like people were coming and going in and out of this congregation. Even the first day, it was like, oh, so and so is here. They're from the Ukraine. Come up and like tell us what you've been doing. And I have to be honest, I had never experienced anything like that, because I came from big church where everything is like smooth and organized and transitions and lighting and all this craziness that we have in the States. And so I liked it right away, even though it was like a bit odd. And the other thing that struck me as strange right from the beginning, that sort of put some questions in my mind. So we did the Torah reading in Hebrew, at least a section of it in Hebrew. There was some talk about, really, I mean, in a way, it was kind of even a scholarly conversation about the Torah reading, but not, maybe it was in part scholarship, in part how shall we live, sort of was, was sort of the question. And but then we're also saying the Lord's Prayer in Arabic. I'm thinking, like, what is this? Like, where does this fall in this continuum? Because it seemed to me you had two choices coming here, which is you're pro-Israel or you're pro-Palestinian. So how do you respond to such a thing? And what is Narkis like in that respect?
You're giving me the mic. Okay. You'll clean it up. Narkis is a weird animal, and you can't really tack it to the wall. It's kind of like Jell-O in that way, and it's kind of different any Shabbat you go to. A box of chocolates, Gary says. And that's a good way to describe it being community-led. I mean, it sort of kind of depends on who happens to be there that day. That could really really take shape according to who's there. I think that's also, you put your finger on another good point about churches here. Well, most communities here, most anything you do get involved in here is going to be biased politically, either towards Israelis or Palestinians, and that's something that we've consciously tried to be aware of, and not just be aware of, but consciously make a commitment to be open to people who are living in both communities, and that causes some tension, and people who first arrive, it rubs them wrong, often for months and even years on end. I don't think it ever actually really settles, because we're never all in the same place. But it's a real problem, because if 95% of the people who come here and work with Palestinians end up being totally pro-Palestinian, and 95% of the people who work with Israelis are all pro-Israeli, I think that says something really damning about us as Christians theologically, just us as humans, that we are so quick and easy to be swayed and closed off to the other. that our sympathy so quickly shrivels up. I mean, it's natural, right? It's natural that you sympathize with the people that you're among. And that's a good thing. I mean, there has to be some kind of cold, emotionally autistic person not to feel the pain of the people that you're around. But I think it takes a thoughtful person to know how to sort of not adopt also that community's biases and hatreds and mistrusts, and that takes a constant battle and a constant awareness and consciousness, and extra effort, and so that's something that we try to do as a practice, because that's not natural. I think that is something that takes something of a built-in ideology, a built-in theology that you just sort of develop. So.
Mm-hmm. And have there been costs to walking such a line? I mean, what would you say to that? Just in terms of the community and the church and the people there.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, most people from either side think that we're too swayed in either direction. Mm-hmm. So,
either Zionist or we're Palestinian.
Yeah, we're either too Zionist or too pro-Palestinian, and we're also we're not a massive congregation. I mean, probably for many reasons, but it's not a popular position to take, because you just sound like you're waffling constantly. Well, there's this, but you got to consider this. But on the other hand, this, and if you can't just come out and just slam down a slogan, then you just sound like you're not sure of yourself. Yeah. Even if that's not true, even if no, wait, this is complicated. This takes a paragraph to describe, not just a sentence. Mm-hmm. People don't have time for paragraphs anymore.
Yeah, seriously. Yeah, Gary, what are you thinking? How would you respond to that?
One of the things we usually talk about is we're not pro-Israel or pro-Palestine, but we're pro-people, and it's. When people walk through the door, it's who are they, wherever they're coming from, and it's not even that. It's people from all over the world. We have people coming from all the nations at different points during the year, and everyone's got a story. And currently, right now, we have a family from Cameroon in the congregation, and Cameroon's going through some, massive conflict, and there's conflict everywhere in the world, and it just so happens that the one here is brought in the news quite often, but there's lots of places that don't get the spotlight that we do here. And so in a sense, it's kind of part of the whole narrative of the people that are coming through and being a part of us. They know what it's like. They're not being sheltered. Often when we think in the West, this whole idea of we got to, have security and we've got to keep our children safe, and people, most of the world is living from hand to mouth and in many different sorts of ways. And so I think our congregation in that sense is on the front line of at least trying to listen and to be aware of realities among the Palestinians and among the Israelis, because it is complicated. It is complex, and there's no easy answers. Mm-hmm. And that's the bottom line. And just historically, our church started in the 1920s when the Baptists bought the property. And looking back into the archives, the first members of the congregation were like they are today. There were some Arabs, there were some Jews, there were some Armenians, and there were some British expats. This is during the British Mandate. Mm-hmm. And it's just fascinating. You follow the history throughout the time. There was always Jews and Arabs and expats kind of being together on this property and, being in community in some sort of way. Mm-hmm. And so it's pretty cool.
Yeah. I mean, this might sound weird, but okay, why not just fold up? It's probably never going to be. It's not going to be a mega church. There's no such thing over here anyway. But right. Why not just be like, hey, we've been at this since the 1920s. it's still a mixture of Arabs and Jews and expats and people passing through, and we're still not that well liked by our neighbors. Like even, I mean, maybe you should mention what happened in the '80s with the building itself. Was that the 1980s?
Yeah.
Well, what happened, real quick?
Sure. So in 1982, there was an arsonist, a fire that burnt down the chapel, the original chapel from the 30s, and went down to ashes. And it was during Sukkot, so that was like October '82. Yeah, Feast of Tabernacles. Good. And our neighboring synagogue, a Reformed synagogue, came the next day was Shabbat, and they brought their chairs over because all the chairs were burnt down too, right? And so the neighboring synagogue brought the chairs over and set them up, and they all joined our congregation that day. And there was a massive outpouring of condolence and what would you use for the word?
Support, I guess. Yeah.
Solidarity. That's the word. And so, that was during a time when our church had grown actually a lot. There was hundreds coming, and before 10 years prior, it had been like maybe 20 to 30 people. And the pastor at that time, Bob Lindsay, what he said was something like, I had been praying for God's fire, to come down, but it wasn't that kind of fire. And anyways, the great thing that happened was from that, there's a Jewish, I think he was a rabbi, Nahum Gamzu, and the reason why he got this name is in Hebrew, Gamzu, Gamzot, Gamze, was anytime anything bad would happen in his life, he would say, well, this also will be for good. And so that became also connected to this event, because from this fire, we were able to build this larger chapel. It took 9 years, but it was kind of like always, are you looking at, because going back to your question, why don't you just fold up?
Yeah, that's where I'm going with this. Yeah,
you go back to that question, and it's like, times might be a little harder, things might be a little smaller, all the typical things that we look for in the West of, signs for business growth or business whatever. It's like, no, there's still hope here. There's still a purpose. There's still a calling. And I think that's why we're involved.
Yeah, and I want to say too that it's not just about like taking a middle of the road thing. Oh, there's this conflict. We take the middle of the road. We're a little bit with you guys, and a little bit with these guys, and we just
the Swedish approach.
Yeah, and we're just let's just try to listen to all sides, and it's not about that at all, because
pretty dirty.
Yeah, it gets dirty, and oftentimes the truth isn't in the middle. I mean, you may on whatever given issue be 70% over here, and the other time it's like it swings way over here, and so
that's actually amazing. I've never thought about it quite like that. That's exactly what it's like, because it feels like you are zigzagging around. You're not just like, hey, just listening to both sides, all the time.
Yeah,
it doesn't work that way.
No, for sure. And so take for example. Like we said, we're pro people. We're open to both sides. I mean, take the very sticky issue of Israel. I mean, and how the church deals with Israel and the Jews and the church. One of the things that I think Narcisse is also known for is its scholarship and the Jewish roots and all of this. And Israel has always been, I think, not just for the church, but in world history, a sort of canary in the coal mine type phenomenon, and how they've been treated sort of a sign of sort of the health of the society, health of the community, and it's been true for the church too. And where you've seen church kind of theology stagnate and go stale and loses power and become anti-Semitic, you see them go off on having a place for the Jews. So it's crazy how those things go hand in hand, so for example, like I think we believe strongly that God has a place for the Jews, and that they are still His chosen people.
That's
for
your
example.
like theological sort of backdrop.
Yeah. But that doesn't have to discount others in the land. I think that we believe with that very strongly that how Israel treats the alien and the widow and the orphan are also paramount, and that He cares equally for the alien. So that today includes the Palestinians, and so those two things don't have to be mutually exclusive, but it derives from there. It derives from a healthy theology, and not from just, well, how can we just all get along, because we have, you have in Europe, for example, with the left, right? They're having serious problems with how to deal with Islamic fundamentalism.
Yeah, big time.
And Europe's a liberal place, right? And so they're like, this is, they don't know where it's coming from, and so they come with a just blanket. All right, no, we in order to stop this, we're just going to have to apply liberalism, just kind of forcefully, and so
Don't wear the hijab.
Don't wear the hijab, and to prove that we're being across the board on this, universal on this, Jews, you guys are gonna have to stop wearing your kippas too, and to prove, and so on halal slaughtering of meat, we're gonna stop that as well. And sorry, Jews, this is gonna apply to you guys now too, just to prove that we're being this. You guys are gonna have to stop your kosher slaughtering as well, because we gotta, sorry, this really has nothing to do with you guys, but we're gonna have to prove our. And so the left, in proving their liberalism, has become just as totalitarian in their response as the right has been in many ways.
Yeah, that's actually incredible, and it's the same approach of Antiochus Epiphanes and like the Greeks. If we could just ban it, meaning the specifics like Shabbat or circumcision or kosher, then everyone will just simply easily move over into our Hellenistic Greek way of life, and
so we're in an age where, like in the rise of fascism, the Jews obviously saw that threat first, and so they fled to Marxism, and then saw Stalin just as totalitarian, just as oppressive, and so you have this kind of totalitarianism on either side, and Judaism is this perennial kind of reminder that you know what, there is something that is not just okay, but there is something beautiful and special about a people being chosen for a unique calling. It's okay to have a uniqueness about you, something special, something different, something that's uniquely you, that's different from everybody else. And we sort of, in our multicultural kind of world, recognize that. But except when you're the wrong tribe trying to.
It's inconvenient.
Yeah,
it can be inconvenient.
Yeah. And then suddenly, whoa, now it's that's the wrong one to kind of emphasize. So again, like that story of a unique calling, and again, unique doesn't mean better.
Yeah.
Right. And that's again, we're like try to emphasize that. Yes, we recognize the Unite calling of the Jews. No, it doesn't mean better than the Palestinians. No, it doesn't mean they get to overlord it over the Palestinians. It just means that we all have a special calling, and look at what he can do for all of us. And so, that's
now how that plays out.
How that plays, yeah.
It's a different story, but yeah. No. That's the complicated part. Is it's like you get married. Okay, now you got to live together, and how is that going to work?
Yeah.
Sorry. So so I think that's an important message theologically for the church, but it's still an important message universally too. I mean, like it was in the days of fascism and the rise in the 1930s, and it is today, as the world doesn't know what to do with this like multiculturalism, but we've kind of lost our way, and where to draw the line, and with identity and.
Yeah. I mean, are you saying in a way that liberalism at its worst has become a kind of new totalitarian regime?
Yeah.
And in an effort to include everybody, they're obliterating differences, and they're doing so with a strong arm. Absolutely. Because places like, whatever, we don't need to name countries, have the power to do so. At least Absolutely. They think they do. And it's obviously backfiring. I wonder how much of that is going on in America. I think probably I'm sure it's crossed the ocean in its own way too. I mean, you see, I guess on the college campus, a version of what you're expressing. It's funny now because I'm in more liberal circles than I used to be, and even coming to Israel, when people hear that, first of all, they might say things like, "You mean Palestine?" And then, okay, where do we go from there? What are we even talking about at this point? Or how can you support that apartheid regime? I would never step foot in Israel. I mean, for the same reason they might read labels and not buy dates from, raised in wherever, in Tel Aviv, but they would from Gaza, So, I mean, I know how I sometimes respond to that, but do you hear things like that? How can you support this? Even living here, I mean, let's be honest. We're in Jerusalem. We're not in the West Bank right this second. What's your reaction to that kind of questioning?
I mean, it doesn't. That's not necessarily flowing from a negative place, right? I mean, we've all tried to become now more conscious of. Tomorrow I'm going to be doing this in a sermon, right? Amos is talking about, not to be oppressive of the poor. And today that's a much more complicated thing because we're not tipping the scales to oppress the poor in simplistic ways. Today we realize that these global companies like Apple, their factories are over in Bangladesh. They're not next door, and so. And everybody's got an Apple iPhone, so you want to be conscious of that. You want to be conscious of how the footprint environmentally and ecologically and socially that you're making in your choices that you make when you make purchases and things like that. And so when people see in the news that Israel make certain choices politically, and that it's unfair to Palestinians and things like that. They want to check. Wait a minute, is this like buying an iPhone that's going to adversely affect people, in Bangladesh or whatever? Now, what I would say to that is okay, let's check it out. Not a bad question.
Yeah.
But again, it's interesting. Israel seems to be kind of singled out here in disproportion to the rest of the world, right? With all these other conflicts and nobody's saying that about, I'm not going to go to Pakistan because of Kashmir. I'm not going to go to Egypt. I would never go see the pyramids.
Yeah,
because of what they're doing to the Copts, or because of the genocidal war that they're conducting in Yemen right now. or I'm not going to go. I'm not going to go to Dubai when there's practically slave labor building those nice skyscrapers there.
Or to turn it even more closer to home here, I'm not going to go to Jordan because of how they treat the Palestinians.
Yeah.
Or I'm not going to go to whatever. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, people. More Palestinians have been slaughtered in the Syrian civil war.
That's the last 8 years.
In the last 8 years, than have been killed by Israelis in decades. And I mean, that's not even on anybody's radar, like even in a blip. I'm talking about how many Palestinians Assad has killed, not the over 500,000 to 1 million Syrians he's killed. I'm talking about specifically Palestinians that he's killed. And that just doesn't even register on anybody's radar, let alone for calling for a military intervention to have that genocide stopped, right? So again, like there's this disproportion again, right? Like how if we go back to France. They set up that law where the hijab was going to be stopped. Kippas were also outlawed, and then crosses were banned, but only of a certain size. So a very large cross. You couldn't wear this very large kind of grotesque thing dangling, but you could still wear a small cross,
right?
Like everyone wears.
Yeah.
So obviously that wasn't going to affect any.
Right.
So you could still, and so that's what I mean by these things about these boycotts, BDS, boycott, divest, and sanction Israel. I think it's usually kind of very disproportionate to what's happening in the rest of the world, and now look, if there is a factory, some Israeli factory in the West Bank, and it's built on stolen Palestinian land, then you know what? I got a problem with that too. You know. But I would say look into it, because oftentimes what's behind this BDS movement is a larger kind of blanket boycott of all things Israeli. And it's kind of a dangerous thing. And so again, see, it's nuanced, and it takes an entire kind of 400-word essay to.
No, seriously, I know. I mean, it just gets more complicated. Actually, the kind of direction I'd like to take it now is like, all right, so I lived here. I had 2 kids at the time, and I wasn't here as working for an NGO or for the U.S. military, or I was a student and I had kids, and our kids were going to school, and they were just little then, but how do you raise your kids here? I mean, what language do they speak, or languages? What kind of schools do they go to? What's that like as a Christian here, living here permanently? What do you tell your kids? I mean, that's what I'm curious about.
Well, I'll go first. Our boys go to an Israeli school here in Jerusalem, and it's a secular school, and the school system is really strange from my perspective, the way I grew up in the U.S. It's very well. First off, you and Danny, and I won't go into it. I'll let Danny go into the explanation of how they divide it up. But you can choose to go to religious school, to a secular school, and then it even breaks down further. And you also go within your group as well. So you'll be going either with Palestinians or you'll be going with Jews. And so it's, I would use the word segregated, wouldn't you? Very much, right? And so it's been interesting from our perspective, because our sons are usually the only Christians in their classes, and then dealing with things like Christmas or holidays that we might celebrate as Christians can become, it can be something that's frowned upon or made fun of. And then Danny grew up here going to these schools as well, so he can give his experience from that. But it becomes, I always say this now, when I go back to America, I always can understand what someone who's coming from minority is experiencing inside of America.
In the school system.
In the school system, or just in general, when I think of someone who doesn't speak English well in America, I can understand that with my Hebrew, and you start to, you're not completely accepted. You're not completely in the system. And even then, when you say, like, your kids grow up and they do speak Hebrew, it still doesn't guarantee completely of acceptance. It's even more. It's just part of it's tribal. I'd say it's definitely very tribal, and I think, Danny, the school that your kids is going to is very kind of unique and revolutionary for Jerusalem, because Jerusalem, out of all of Israel, is very different because it's so divided. Not only does it have this line down the middle, going back to before the 6-Day War, where the minefield separated East and West Jerusalem, where, West was a part of Israel and East was a part of Jordan. And it still has that line, even if it's invisible. There's a road today, but that you can still feel the line. You cross over that road from west to the east side, and it's like a different spirit or something. I don't know how to describe it, but different culture.
I lived in Abu Tor, right near where we are, and there's like a line where it also follows the line that you're speaking of, but it's sort of like Jewish house, Palestinian, and it's just like, there it is. It's as plain as day, and you can feel the energy of it as soon as you're going back and forth. You can feel the tension of such a place. So anyway, what about you, Danny? What language do you speak at home? Where do your kids go to school? What's it like here?
That's everything Gary described is exactly right. So in contrast to that very kind of segregated system, and it's segregated, by the way, not in the sense that people are forced to be segregated. They're forced because they're segregated because the communities want to be in their own schools. The religious Jews want a religious education. They say, get this secular, nonsense away from us. The seculars say, get this religious nonsense away from us. We want a secular education. It's
very small here in Jerusalem.
Seculars are a small minority here now. And so same with Palestinians and Israelis and so on and so on. So my kids go to they're in a bubble of a mixed school. So it's a school that is half Palestinian, half Jewish. Every class has a Jewish and a Palestinian teacher. It's half Arabic, half Hebrew. And so all the kids there grow up speaking both languages, and that's they have a school like this in every major city now in the country, and it's kind of a unique. It's not an experiment now; it's a pretty successful enterprise now, and they're actually really popular everywhere that they have these schools. There's a really big waiting list to get in, which has been a really major success. It was arsoned as well. The school that my kids go to, actually, the class that my son, when he was in first grade, thankfully not when any of them were there, it was in the middle of the night. But so it's something that's frowned upon by extremists, obviously.
Extremists in what? Like who burned it down?
In this case, it was Jewish kind of nationalists. Religious nationalists attacked it.
Did you actually catch someone and prosecute?
They did, yeah. They went to jail, and they've since been released. They were teenagers at the time, yeah.
So your kids are going to school in Hebrew and in Arabic, in this experimental school. I mean, to me, that sounds like the best thing I've ever heard. Just in terms of like the future, more of that sounds like a good idea.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, it has its issues too. We have all kinds of issues as well. But yeah, it is a little bit of a utopia. I mean, one of the things I think that's kind of most amazing about it is that the first fear that everyone always has about it is that, oh my goodness, all those kids there, I'm sure those kids must not know who they are. They must have, their identities must be they must be totally confused about who they are. And the exact opposite actually happens to these kids. They come out with their identities really, really strengthened, kind of reinforced, actually. Despite the fact that, say, even like in history class, they will teach both narratives, say about the 1948 war. They teach it as the War of Independence from the Israeli side, and then they teach about how it is the Nakba, or the catastrophe, for the Palestinians. And those are two sort of competing narratives that aren't reconciled, and they don't reconcile those two narratives. They just sort of leave. I mean, sort of like you do when you go to college, right? That's sort of something that you learn when you go to college, that there are competing narratives, and that there isn't just sort of one textbook on history. You got to sort of synthesize and kind of hear the different angles and know that really you don't arrive at a kind of a truth that is ever can be told from one perspective, and for these kids, it's amazing. Already from like fourth grade, that's just like so obvious to them. They're like, well, yeah, I mean, well, just like a car accident, this person saw it from that because they were standing on that side of the street. This person saw it like that, and this person, and it's just the most obvious thing in the world to them, and they really come out with a kind of pretty sophisticated view on life already from a very kind of early age.
What do you speak at home then with your kids?
Well, it's funny. My eldest was born in the States, and when we were there, we were really kind of concerned and conscious of being able to maintain those languages. So I talked to Rafi in Hebrew, and Eva spoke to him in Arabic because she's Palestinian or half Palestinian. Her father's Palestinian and her mother's Korean. And actually his English wasn't very good while we were in America. And then when we got back here, we knew because he was going to be immersed in those languages at school, we switched back to English at home.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, I just love these little windows into like ordinary life. Because as soon as you start talking about Israel and Palestine, then there are dates involved and figures and numbers and debates and ideologies and I don't know. I think it's interesting to talk about sort of daily life. All right, so here's another sort of line of question. We've been talking for like 45 minutes, and I guess it has to do with Narcisse and its unique a perspective on the Bible, and I guess maybe you could say on the historical Jesus. Like, so my experience there at Narcisse was that it's a church where there's some scholarship going on. It's not like there's some real depth, and diving into the New Testament, diving into the Hebrew Bible, there was a kind of an expectation that we're going to be talking about the grammar of the Hebrew here, and we're wanting to know more about the contextual milieu out of which these texts were born. And that's one reason why I loved it. I mean, I was doing the same thing in class. That was also happening in church, just maybe with the added layer of theology. I wasn't doing theology in class. I was doing whatever, historical, critical stuff, but they weren't that far apart. And I never experienced anything like that. I mean, other than occasionally a pastor, like in the U.S. or something, will say like, well, in Greek, it means whatever. beyond that, there's not a lot of contextual stuff going on. And of course, that was my world for a long time. And I don't know what my question is exactly, but maybe it's something as simple as, why does that matter now? I mean, even some people, because I feel like for a long time I was in more conservative fundamentalist circles, and a lot of what I was saying was challenging people's assumptions about the Bible. And that was like shocking to them. And I enjoyed it on the one hand. But the perspective that the Bible mattered was already foundational. And now I'm in a completely different boat. I'm mostly around people that I have to try to convince that it even matters. Like if I say something like the biblical narrative or the Bible itself, maybe also Greek philosophy, are the two spines of Western culture. You simply cannot dismiss it. That's just my view. You cannot dismiss the Bible nor the person of Jesus, yet it still like sort of remains a contemporary question. Really? Like, why look back? Can't we just like move on? Who cares what the Hebrew says? So that's kind of like, why does context matter, I guess is what I'm saying. And can it help with like the changing face of religion? Because I don't think anyone would disagree with that. We might disagree on maybe the direction it's going. Maybe no one knows the direction it's going, but religion is in this state of flux and evolution, and it seems to be particularly acute around the world. Why does it matter? I mean, I guess, is that a good enough question?
Sure, Kent.
Thank you, Gary. I've never really this sort of feels like an interview, but I'm trying to keep it like a conversation too. So,
well, talking about our congregation, I would definitely say context is one of our core values, and finding the context of the Bible is crucial to what we're all about. And we want people to think, and we want people to ask questions, first off. And I think you've talked about this before, all the time Jesus teaches by asking questions. It's not like he's going around and saying, these are my 50 truths and memorize them.
My doctrines.
These
are my doctrines.
Right. He's throwing questions at you, and he's causing people to think. And it's and so we hope to do the same thing, because the Bible, like you said, it's a core text to, in a lot of ways, Western civilization and just the way we try to pursue justice in the world. And there's lots of things that people don't realize it's come from the Bible. And especially in liberalism, I think a lot of liberalism comes from the Bible. At its.
In what sense? That's interesting.
I mean, just the idea of people have value, like human rights would be a value that is so foreign in most of the world, even today. Even though we have the United Nations and we have all of this stuff to try to shut wars down and all this, it's still very much people are tribal, and that the whole thing of love your neighbor as yourself, which is in Leviticus 19:18, and then Jesus uses it, connects it right with the Shema of loving the Lord and loving your neighbor, loving the person who's there with you. I think just that concept right there it's a revolutionary value, and I very much think that's the whole again, I'm not some expert on liberalism and philosophy, but I do think that is got to be a core value for the liberal, background. But so let's see, what were we talking about again?
Well, I guess my question was like something like why
Context.
look back in the context, and maybe we can make it about Jesus too. Like, sometimes I think about there are Jesuses, plural. You've got the historical Jesus who's down there in the well of time somewhere, and you have the various expressions of the Jesus of church history. The Syrian Jesus looks a lot different than the Roman Jesus, and so forth and so on. Not a lot different, but you know what I'm saying.
And the American Jesus.
And you've got American boyfriend Jesus. So, why does the
historical
Yeah,
Jesus
why does it
matter?
matter still? And I'm not asking from a scholarship point of view. That ship, I'm not saying academically. I'm saying, why does it matter to just your average person, whether they're sort of a Christian or they're not even? Why does that matter?
I mean, I think people need to be shook up. I think at the core, people are too comfortable and they're too relaxed when it comes to everybody. If you think you're good, it's all settled, and I have nothing to work on or nothing to kind of improve. I mean, I would use the basic biblical sentence: repent from your sins. That John the
Wow.
Baptist
Coming in heavy.
bringing down my evangelical propaganda. Repentance of sins, is, I think, at a core of Jesus's teachings when he comes in. And he specifically is hitting the righteous. He's hitting the people that are comfortable, that they think it's all cool and they've got it all figured out. And I think Jesus is, he came to shake people up. And I think when you pursue the historical Jesus, not the Jesus of your culture, the Jesus of where you feel comfortable, then you'll want to throw him off the cliff too, like in Nazareth, because it's a visceral reaction to who he and his message. It's like, look at yourself in the mirror, and there's a lot of work to do and to be transparent about, and not just kind of cover it up with, well, I'm liberal and I give my money to this cause and I love everybody, but
Or the conservative version.
And the conservative version,
which would be something like what?
The conservative version would be like, I've got it all together. I don't need to worry about the rest of you out there, where you essentially cut yourself off from the rest of the world, and you live in your tower of righteousness, whatever that is.
Yeah.
And no, it's dirty. It's there are people out there, and Jesus has called us to be pro people, whatever state they're in, and however broken they are. And I think this is what I like about our congregation, going back, is we've got a lot of messed up people. It's not kind of the stereotype that people have of the homeless or the drug addicts or this, but just average people, and people struggle. And Danny's dad, Chuck Kopp, was the pastor for 24 years prior to us, and he used to call Narquise an emergency room at a hospital. It's a place where people can come in, they're bleeding, they're broken a bone, whatever it is, and just to know that you can come into this emergency room and hopefully you'll get treated in a few hours, but at least you have to recognize that you're in that state of, I need to repent, I need to get fixed, I need help. I think that's what the historical Jesus, talking to the average person on the street, community. Why don't you talk about that?
Hey, well said. I mean, thanks. I mean, that's obviously we don't have a script ahead of time, and I think that was a powerful answer or response, I guess, to the question. Yeah, you got anything to add, Danny? What's going on in your mind?
Yeah, the common answer to that is always that, like you said, why is it important? Because, Christianity and, like you said, Greek philosophy and all that are the foundations of Western civilization, and so you can't, if you're a curious person, you've got to, if you want to know what makes civilization tick, then yeah, you should want to know, but they'll always come back at you with, no, it's much more Greek philosophy than Christianity that is the foundation of Western civilization today, and that's just Christian propaganda that tries to tell you that and so people always come back at you with these types of kind of rhetorics, but and so that can be an endless loop of an argument. But like, I come back again to like Judaism, or really it's the Bible. It's the text of the Bible that is just like, again, this canary in the coal mine thing again of because what happened in Nazi Germany, right? The Nazis just, again, the most brilliant advanced civilization on the face of the earth, right? I mean, they were way beyond the U.S. even in terms of, by every measure, like technologically, culturally, in music, in
art,
everything. Yeah, art. I mean,
engineering. Yeah.
I mean, they thought, who are these buffoons that are even showing up on Normandy? We're going to waste these guys. Like, it doesn't matter if there's more of them. Like, they're just, but they had so lost their moral compass, right, that they could be entertaining notions that yeah, but just genetically, Jews have smaller brains, and yeah, crippled people, they're just kind of a drag on society. So why not? Like, just why not? Why not just get rid of them? We could just have society would be clean, and society would be cleaner without autistic people. Like, it would. I mean, just practically speaking, and so how do you go there from there to there? And there's something with Jewish community for thousands of years, and so cultures have gone like that. And you'll watch a culture just like with these massive swings just go crazy. Like, look at American society today, right? And how we've America has just like just gone up and down in its welcoming to immigrants, and then closing its borders, welcoming, closing. And you take like and so you look at Jewish society, and I use this example constantly, but there's just something healthy about the way that they understand that, like, we're family no matter what. It doesn't matter almost what you believe even, right? And so, whereas like the evangelical thing is, if you
your family if you believe.
If you believe, right? So if your son came home with his gay boyfriend, or said he was going to come home with his gay boyfriend for Christmas, it'd be like, you better not show up with your gay boyfriend for Christmas, right? Whereas Jews, even maybe Orthodox Jews, right, they may have just as strong an aversion maybe to the fact that your son said he just has a homosexual boyfriend, right? But their response would be, oh my gosh, okay, whatever, you're crazy and I'm pissed and I'm going to beat you up, but just you better dare not show up for Pesach dinner, right? You better be there, whatever's going on in your life, right? Because whatever happens at the end of the day, wherever you're at, whatever you're believing, whatever, you better show up for Pesach dinner, right? So there's no grounds for rejection ever. Like, we're family, we're community, we are. You will always be a part, right? And that's the story of the
biblical tradition.
Of the biblical narrative, right? Amos, he's going on about like, I'm going to destroy you guys. I'm going to whip you, but I'm going to bring you back because I love you, because I made you, and you're going to, I'm going to bring. Of course, I'm going to bring you back. Of course, Of course, that's the whole point. The whole point of even the destruction is to bring you back. Like, that's never the ultimate goal. And so, and that, I think, has always been that narrative is at the core of Western society. And if you dig down deep enough, and if you you hold on to it, it'll be there. And if not, then yeah, we go towards Nazi Germany, or into some kind of totalitarianism in its leftist form or in its right wing form.
Yeah. Okay, that's been 1 hour. Thank you. I mean, both of you. I had this idea. We didn't talk about this ahead of time, really. I showed up here in Israel, and I sent a text a few days ago, and I said, let's get together and let's try to make a podcast. So, yeah, I mean, you got something to say, Gary?
I was just going to close out with community. I feel like that's our congregation. It's not a pretty community. It's not an easy community, but it's the community that keeps the ties. And even like with you, you've been gone, 15 years from the land?
Yeah, 2006. Mm-hmm.
And there's plenty of others of people that we've known over the years. People come back even 40 years.
You're still a member, whether you like to or not.
Yeah.
and so in that regard, it feels it's a small microcosm of what we feel like the global church could or should be. Mm-hmm. Doesn't matter where you live around the world, but you're sewn together in your spirit. Mm-hmm. And so
Shalom.
Who was that?
That was my other Hebrew teacher. Yeah.
Anyways, it's
well
good.
said.
It's good to be together.
I like that as kind of like a microcosm, and that's actually the thing I love most about Narcisse. It does seem like a microcosm of what the global church is like and can look like, both in its sort of like multicultural ways and in its hodgepodgeness, and in the fact that it's a bit like a hospital room, an emergency waiting room, and it's a bit. What was the phrase I used at the beginning? It's like community run, or it's like it's not this sort of top down, sort of cleaned up, thing. So anyway, thanks. That's what I got.
You're welcome, and thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Thanks very much.